Vandana Shiva is here. Many times we can tell for half an hour about what she has done, why we love her, you know. But I am not going to talk about it because you all know her work, what she has done. How many of you have read Soil Not Oil? Can I count you? 1, 2. Can you raise your hand if you haven't read Soil Not Oil? Okay, because we have very few. After she speaks, you have to go quickly and get one of them. So, Vandana, do you want to come? Let me make this video. I think this is okay, right? I think this is okay. What do you think?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Miguel. You know, about 10 years ago, I wrote Soil Not Oil for 2 reasons. The first was all the solutions that we have on the ground were not being talked about. And secondly, the big contribution of fossil fuel agriculture to climate change was not being talked about. So for me, soil was the metaphor of a worldview based on recognition of living systems, the earth as a self-organized system. The reason James Lovelock called the earth Gaia is because his work, he worked for NASA, his work showed him that the earth regulates her own temperature. The earth regulates her climate systems. The earth has created the conditions for life to evolve. And therefore he called her a self-organized goddess, Gaia, the Greek goddess. Just 200 years ago, humanity found ways to exploit this living Earth's systems that had been fossilized over 600 million years to create the coal and the oil and the gas that's being fracked. And every year, we've started to burn 20 million years of nature's work. And quite clearly, there's a disproportion. Because while all living systems are based on cycles, we have a hydrological cycle, the water cycle, we have a carbon cycle, we have a nitrogen cycle, the rupture of these cycles is based on burning that which should have been left underground, and at the same time pretending to ourselves that we can substitute nature's work. I'll give you a very simple example. The same factories that made the ammunitions and explosives for the war in Hitler's Germany, by fixing atmospheric nitrogen and burning fossil fuels at very high temperatures, the slogan at that time of finding out that the same ammonium nitrates could also become synthetic fertilizers, the slogan created was, "We will now create bread from air." And for every kilogram of nitrogen fertilizers, 2 liters of diesel is being used up. But every kilogram of nitrogen fertilizer is then emitting nitrous oxides that are 300 times more destabilizing for the Earth's climate systems than carbon dioxide. And it's the combination of all the ruptures of the Earth's cycles, the breaking of the planetary boundaries, and the nitrogen boundary has been broken far more deeply than even the carbon system. Part of it is going up into the atmosphere, contributing the greenhouse gas that's 300 times more deadly than carbon dioxide. Also methane, two big sources of methane are food waste, created by the same industrial system, as well as factory farms, created by the same industrial system. Factory farms use 100 times more inputs as energy as they give us as food. Industrial farming based on fossil fuels uses 10 times more energy than it can produce as food. It's a hugely inefficient system. Working with nature, working with the earth, working with the biodiversity, turns 1 unit of input into 10 units of food. And nourishing food at that. At this point, I think we need to look at three things. The first is the paradigm of industrialism, which grew from the explosion of dependence on fossil fuels. Most people forget that there was just one big player in the world a century ago, Standard Oil. And it had to be split into, I think, 26 companies. Exxon is one of them. Mobil is one of them. They're all basically new names for the old Standard Oil and its descendants. And it's not an accident that it's Rockefeller which owns Standard Oil, which also pushed chemical farming on the third world, on countries like mine, in the name of the Green Revolution. Green Revolution was nothing more than pushing chemical fertilizers and changing plants to actually produce less biomass and more commodities. But what does the reduction of biomass mean? It means the most efficient ecological system we have in the world of taking the sun's energy, which then allows plants and algae to fix carbon dioxide, turn it into all the materials that make life possible, all the food, all the fiber, all the energy. And in one day of the sun's gifts, we could provide all of the annual needs of humanity in a renewable system. But a renewable living system, not a renewable mechanical system. So looking at the destruction that was caused to the atmosphere, which is what climate change is, but even more importantly, the destruction on the land, to cultures, to communities, because every push of fossil fuels was an uprooting of people. Everywhere in the world, it's the world's biggest displacement. And we were always put down as being undeveloped on grounds that we weren't using fossil fuels. That was our undevelopment. And development was defined as dependence on fossil fuels. And so many of the countries are still schizophrenic, because they say, oh yeah, we've got to reduce dependence on fossil fuels. And then they turn around, but you can only have development with fossil fuels. I mean, you look at the negotiations and look at the positions governments take. Why do we have a climate treaty? And why was the climate treaty dismantled? In 1992, the two big concerns that came from movements on the one hand and ecological scientists on the other was the fact that species were disappearing at a very fast rate. And the Earth Summit gave the name biodiversity to the diversity of species on this planet. That led to the Convention on Biological Diversity, which also has a protocol on biosafety, which is regulating GMOs. The second treaty was the UN Framework on Climate Change. The UN Framework on Climate Change is what was led and driven by 2,500 scientists from different fields, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And this internationally legally binding treaty was distracted in the early period by something called the Kyoto Protocol. Why was the Kyoto Protocol not a solution to climate change? Because it rewarded trade in emissions. It created something called clean development mechanism, which meant that a country that is not destroying the climate, or a sector of the economy that's not destroying the climate, could trade with the polluting industry, and the polluting industry could keep polluting and take the non-pollution of the non-polluting activity as its share and neutralize it. The assumption was trade in emissions would bring down emissions. It increased emissions. So by the end of the Kyoto Protocol period, you actually had more emissions. And therefore you continue to have all the destabilization. I always say climate change is not just about temperature increase. What is killing people is extreme weather, unpredictable weather. So I actually don't even use the word climate change. I use the word climate chaos, because we don't know anymore what our climate will be. Jerry, my dear friend Jerry from IFG is here, and he and Teddy Goldsmith wrote a brilliant book on globalization, and Teddy also wrote a book called The Way, and he derived the word the way from the Indian concept of Rita, the right way, the right livelihood. And what's the right way? Working in alignment with nature, with the universe, with our humanity. The word climate and weather in Sanskrit, in Hindi, my language, is derived from Rita, the right way, and it creates Ritu. Ritu is the climate. Now, when we destabilize the climate, it's partly because we started living out of context in terms of the Earth's boundaries, limits, processes, renewal. And the flooding we've just witnessed, whether it's in my region, North India, my valley has had more rain than I've seen in a long time, but all of North India, 43 million people have been displaced, about 500 have died. About 3 years ago in my region, we had such a heavy climate event. On the first 2 days of monsoons, on the 16th and 17th of June, when the monsoon just begins, 20,000 people were washed away because of the flooding. It was a combination of heavy rains, a glacial lake bursting, maldevelopment, which had led to highways, bridges, hotels, all being washed away. And I witnessed the riverbeds rising from where you're sitting to up to that highest row of benches. Not the water, the river bed. And of course it took with it the villages, it took with it the bridges, it took with it the roads. And so many parts of my region up in the Himalaya still haven't recovered. We had to do something we weren't equipped to do. We had to put up schools. There were no bridges we could build, but we had to build cableways for children to cross rivers. Otherwise, they were taking 8 hours to go to school and come back. My colleagues in Bihar right now, ringing me up and saying, we are in such high water that only our tables have place that's dry, and we are sleeping on tables. You've had your Harvey, you're having Irma. I think Irma is the name. I mean, once in a while they give a male name Harvey. By and large, all hurricanes and cyclones have female names. And I always say they should be called Exxon number 1, Mobil number 1, Because at the end of the day, all of this destabilization is a result of pollution. I think we should start talking about climate change as pollution. Because at the Earth Summit, besides the climate treaty and besides the biodiversity treaty, we had two principles that have been very important in the last 2.5 decades. One was called the Polluter Pays. And it is time, and I know you'll have working groups on climate justice. Climate justice means polluters should pay. You know, this Houston flooding, they were talking about how the damage is 29 billion. That's one flood. My country, it's probably 50 billion. I did a calculation one year where we had huge flooding and huge drought. The cost was 40 billion. There is no way that pathetic climate fund in the UN, to which no one is contributing. They haggle during negotiations and no money comes. But there's no way it could ever compensate for the damage. So the polluter should pay in terms of first the awareness of what is happening. My communities in the hills, you know, I work in Ladakh, which is a high altitude desert. They've had climate havoc by having such heavy rains that they've had flooding. 200 people washed away a few years ago. And they don't use fossil fuels at all. They're the totally renewable economy. And the ones who are suffering most are the ones who did not cause the pollution. That's why issues of climate justice become so important. We lost the whole Kyoto period by rewarding the polluters. And then sadly, President Obama flew into Copenhagen at the Copenhagen summit and undid the legally binding treaty. Got together with the top polluters, including my country, including China, and said, let's not have legally binding arrangements, which is what an international treaty is supposed to be. And said, let's have voluntary commitments. Voluntary commitments meant that the so-called emissions gap is staring us in the face. Now, one could become hopeless about this, or one could realize three things at this moment. First, that the governments have given up their role to regulate the polluters. But it's not just in the field of climate. It's in biotechnology, it's in glyphosate, it's in Roundup, on everything. Deregulation is the fashion. Deregulation is precisely what globalization was supposed to achieve. In my view, globalization, on which we've all worked so hard, I'm so happy Jerry is here, Debbie Barker is here, we stopped the WTO in Seattle. Globalization was meant to do three things. The first is globalize the economy for the big giants, which meant destroy the local economy and domestic economies, and we watched this happen. And the mere fact that you had an election of the kind you had is because the economies of this country have been devastated. And people who have no jobs, no livelihoods, no employment, are then manipulated. There's an amazing article in Newsweek on the fact that you might actually have the first artificial intelligence president. Now, I'm not saying that in terms of his intelligence, because I don't know what would one qualify it as, but because Facebook takes all the social media, turns it into capital, sells it to big data companies who turn it into algorithms, and what was done in your elections for the first time was harvesting. Where is there a tendency of hating women? Feed them advertisement on hatred. Who hates Muslims? Feed them that. Who doesn't like blacks? Who doesn't like immigrants? And those four categories became the basis of mobilizing through digital media. A capital that came from social media turned the celebration of democracy into the domination of hate. And so artificial intelligence, which is merely taking algorithms and generating messages, is what produced the voting patterns that you got. Today's climate crisis, it's 100% a result of the fossil fuel age, all its pollution, but all its destruction of ecological systems, including ecological economies. And I wrote Soil Not Oil because it was so clear that 40% then, 50% today of the globalized industrialized system, which was about expanding markets for a fossil fuel agriculture, 50% greenhouse gases are coming from that sector, which is not even noticed. But the second aspect of globalization was deregulation. Knock down labor laws, knock down environmental laws, deregulate finance. It's the deregulation of finance which has given us the giant investment funds, which are increasing their funds. Vanguard is the biggest. It went from 3 trillion last year to 4 trillion this year, in 1 year. This is the billionaires' money. You know, when we started IFG, we used to talk of corporate rule, but every corporation is now owned by the billionaires through these investment funds. So they basically are the polluters who should pay. Yes. Because they own every company. And I say, you know, if you're so proud of the economy you've built, why do you hide? Why do you hide your investment patterns? You know, when we sit together, when we sit with friends, we let everyone know these are our relations. Why do you have to hide? And not just hide your control mechanisms, but hide the costs that you are bringing to the planet and people everywhere. They used to say, you know, the future damage. People used to talk about 100 years from now, climate change will start becoming serious. It's become so serious that people are dying today. But people like Stephen Hawking, who's supposed to be another brilliant man, says that we've got 100 years, and then we'll be extinct on this planet. Therefore, we must escape to other planet. There's a person who makes electric cars, Musk, yeah? Well, you know, he's so busy selling billion-dollar tickets to get to Mars. And he's done an interview on how he's going to ship everything to build a community on Mars, but it would be a very tiny portion of the human beings who could go there. The rest would have to fade out. And I love his description of what he'd build on Mars. There'd be everything he says, including a Pizza Hut. Everything, including a Pizza Hut. No sign of food, no sign of life, no sign of agriculture. They are miraculously expecting life to emerge. So to Hawking and to Musk, I say, no, we are born on this beautiful planet. We are earthlings, we are Earth citizens. We are members of the Earth family. We have a moral, ethical, ecological duty to take care of this Mother Earth. There is no escape. Extinction is not inevitable. Escape is irresponsibility, both in terms of the arrogance and the hubris, but also in saying, we'll trash our mother and walk away. It's not on. Now, many of our colleagues started to pick up the fact that solutions lie in the soil. And I'm so happy about that. I'm so happy a conference like this has been organized by Miguel over the last few years on Soil Not Oil. But I am troubled about one thing, and therefore I have done a new report. And it's the first time We're releasing it here. I've just carried a few copies. It is titled Seeds of Hope, Seeds of Resilience. Yeah. And the subtitle is How Biodiversity and Agroecology Offer Solutions to Climate Change by Growing Living Carbon. Why am I having to use the word living carbon? Because there are people who are suggesting we decarbonize the economy. Now, we need to decarbonize our economy in terms of fossil fuels, but we need to recarbonize our economy in terms of living carbon. Because if you were to totally decarbonize the economy, we'd have a dead planet. All plants are that amazing conversion through photosynthesis into living carbon. The soil gets its life through living carbon being returned. Albert Howard, who wrote a book after coming to India in 1905, and it's called The Agricultural Testament, it's called the Bible of Modern Organic Farming. He says there are two principles he learned from India, from the peasants of India and the pests of India. He said, I decided to get the pests and the peasants to be my professors because there were no pests in the field. And I wanted to figure out how do you do good farming where you don't have to spray pesticides, where pests are not a problem. Because according to him, weeds and pests in a field are symptoms of bad farming. Good farming should have no pests. It should have insects that live in deep balance. It should have lots of plants, including uncultivated wild edibles. But that is not a weed. You know, on our farm that I've built up over the years, we have one course through the year. One reason I have to rush back home is we have a 1-month course going on the A to Z of agroecology and organic food systems, where we talk about living soil, living seed, living food, and living economies. 4 weeks of thought as well as practice on how do you actually save seeds? How do you breed seeds? How do you make living soil? And what is the life in the soil? And what's living food? Living food is the currency of life. As we have an ancient Upanishad which says, everything is food, everything is something else's food. And part of the problem of that fossil fuel age was we created this horrible pyramid of man being on the top, which is what anthropocentrism is about. And the people who try and address the climate problems that have been created by irresponsible men as us being in the Anthropocene age. We'll never be in an Anthropocene age. We'll always be an Ecocene age. The power to destroy the Earth systems is not the same as the power to create Earth systems. And I think the illusion of creation, you know, Monsanto has that pathetic illusion, constantly says they're the inventors and makers and creators of seed, therefore they need patents. And that's why we joke and say, for them GMO means God move over. But that illusion of creation is also in the experiments of geoengineering. And Bill Gates is funding a lot of them. Bill Gates is funding a lot of the piracy of climate-resilient crops. You know, we've built 227 community seed banks. The one in Orissa, which is on the coast, we saved salt-tolerant varieties. And in those days, people used to say, why are you saving that? It's a primitive variety. Well, we saved the salt-tolerant varieties, and in 1999, when the super cyclone hit, we could distribute those seeds. A few years later, 5 years later, when the tsunami hit, we could take 2 truckloads of salt-tolerant seeds down to Tamil Nadu. The government had given up and said, we can't do agriculture for 5 years, there's too much salt on the land. But the brilliance of our farmers and the intelligence of nature had given us these amazing climate-resilient varieties that allow us to deal with drought, with floods, with salinity that comes with hurricanes and cyclones. And that's why we've called this report the Seeds of Hope and the Seeds of Resilience, because we are dealing on a daily basis with climate havoc. But it's in these seeds that solutions lie. There is, of course, a huge attempt to pirate the climate-resilient traits that farmers have evolved. There are 1,500 patents on climate-resilient crops that farmers have evolved. And how do these patents get taken now? First of all, they're taken by genomic mapping. Monsanto and Bill Gates are big in this. How does genomic mapping get done? You know, all the public seed banks have seeds with passport data, and the passport data will tell you this is a drought-resistant maize, or this is a flood-resistant rice. So they take all of those varieties and then run them through a computer that does the genomic mapping. And as a company called Evergene does a lot of this mapping and uses a program called Athlete, says we take thousands of varieties that farmers have bred, basically, public varieties, and we select the 100 winners who might have the genome for the trait that we are looking for. They have no idea, but they take a patent. And they would like to prevent farmers from having access to their own seeds. I'm so proud our patent office rejected a patent application of Monsanto for a climate-resilient seed. And that's why, whether it's President Obama or President Trump, the pressure carries on India to say, change your laws, because we do not allow patenting of seeds and patenting of life. In fact, even last week, there was a huge delegation from the US trying to put pressure to say, change your laws, change your laws, change your laws. Again, part of globalization. Our climate-resilient seeds are a double insurance. First, because they have resilience built into them. Second, because they are in the commons, because they are in farmers' hands. When a cyclone hits, the farmers have it. Can you imagine if they were patented? Can you imagine what would happen in times of climate havoc if they were in the hands of Monsanto? We've just done a 20-year study of what's happened on our farm and organic farms in our valley, and compared it to chemical farms. I work with India's top soil ecologist. And this is the data we have for a variation of crops, variation of farms. The organic matter in chemically farmed soils has gone down 14%. In organic soils, it has increased up to 99%. But that's not all. We think chemical fertilizers give nitrogen to the soil. Nitrogen has gone down in synthetic fertilizer applied soils by 22%, and it has increased up to 100%. Where does nitrogen come from? It comes from the earthworms, it comes from all the bacteria, it comes from the amazing life in the soil. Factories don't make soil fertility. Soil organisms and soil diversity make soil fertility. There's a lot of zinc deficiency all over. 37% less zinc in the soils chemically farmed, and therefore less zinc in the plants we eat, therefore zinc deficiency, which is leading to a lot of increase in depression. Zinc has increased 14% in our organic soils. Manganese, which is being identified as a micronutrient deficiency responsible for attention deficit disorder, has gone down by 17% in chemical soils. It's increased by 14%. in organic soils. So the first theft that a fossil fuel agriculture is engaging in is a theft from nature, theft from the soil. I remember, I think, again, it's Howard or someone else of that time who said, it's the ultimate banditry. And it's a banditry that is so hugely irresponsible that this is stealing from future generations. The second is that soil health converts into our health. Micronutrient deficiencies are so responsible for so many of the chronic diseases. And the toxics that are added to the food explain the rest. 75% of the planet's life has been destroyed by chemical farming. Whether you look at soil, or you look at biodiversity, or you look at water resources, 50% of the climate stability. And they provide only 30% of the food, and the corn and soya, 95% of your corn and soya is GMOs. Only 10% corn and soya goes into the food system. The rest is biofuel and animal feed. So there's no food for humans, there's no food for other species. And food is what makes living carbon give you more carbon. But living carbon doesn't just give you food and carbon, it increases water holding capacity. With 0.5% increase in organic matter, you can hold 80,000 liters in a hectare of water, in the hectare of land. That is what California should be doing, not mining the groundwater. And that's the reason looking at only carbon can repeat the errors of emissions trading during the Kyoto Protocol period. There are a lot of people, including in the movement, with whom I have to debate, who say to me, but Vandana, farmers aren't getting enough, and therefore it's good if they sell soil carbon. I said, no, they don't just grow carbon, they're growing nitrogen, they're growing zinc, they're growing magnesium, they're growing every trace element, they're growing nourishing food. We should respect farmers and reward farmers for the nourishment they grow, not bring them in a degraded commodity system. You know, we've lost, since globalization, since 1995, we've lost more than 300,000 farmers to suicide because of debt to high costs of chemicals, GMOs, royalties that shouldn't be getting collected by Monsanto, and that's why I call Monsanto a criminal. I have said the farmers' suicides of India in the cotton areas, which is now 95% Monsanto's BT cotton, that this is a genocide. And of course the fact that the Roundup of Monsanto has dropped the monarch population to 10%, that's ecocide. That the same poison cartel has made 75% of our bees disappear, that's ecocide. And agriculture, where you spray a chemical to kill everything green, that's ecocide. I remember during the negotiations on the Convention on Biological Diversity, one of the heads of Monsanto was there, and he was trying to push GMOs and pushing herbicide-resistant crops. And he says, these crops are so smart that they prevent the weeds from stealing the sunshine. And I remember responding and saying, first of all, what you call weeds are our food. Roundup resistance had made the amaranth a superweed in this country, the Palmer amaranth. Bill Gates and DARPA, or Defense Research, has just done a report saying we must use the new technologies of gene editing and gene drives, which would push species to extinction, to push the amaranth to extinction. And there's a footnote, yeah, there'll be a little side effect. Countries like India eat the amaranth. But besides the impact on our food security, is the ecocide of being an exterminator of a species by deliberate will. And I don't think that should be allowed. Extermination was wrong in the camps of Hitler, in the concentration camps of Hitler. It was wrong then, it's wrong today. So on the one hand, we have to realize that the soil is so rich in biodiversity, and every bit of that biodiversity needs to be protected. Can't be reduced to one element, carbon. The fact that dead carbon causes problems shouldn't turn us into new carbon reductionists. But we need to grow not just the living carbon, we need to grow all of the amazing nutrients and fertility that grow from the soil into the plants to all the animals, including us. That's why the life of the soil, the life of the seed, the life of the food is vital. And there are no shortcuts. There are no shortcuts outside rejuvenating life on this earth with deep humility, recognizing that we are one among 300 species, and the best we can do is be co-creators and co-producers with others. And very often, it's the microorganisms and the bacteria which we have so underestimated, or in the 100 years of the capacity to have antibiotics, the capacity to have germ warfare, is basically to kill our best friends. You know, we have 100 trillion microbes in our body. We are only 10% of us. The rest of us is others. And those others are doing the brilliant work of converting the sun's energy, which became the green plants, which became the food, which goes to our gut. And the gut microbiome is now being recognized as the basis of health. It's being called the second brain. All of the autism, all of the Alzheimer's, all of the epidemics we are seeing of neurological problems are related to how the gut bacteria have been killed. And the very important debate yesterday, Bobby Kennedy was with me at the Heirloom Expo. Now, the way Roundup kills plants is by disrupting what's called the metabolic pathway, called the shikimate pathway. And Dr. Don Huber was the one who kept pointing this out so long ago, that plants have it, but we have it too, not in our cells, but in the cells of the 90% of us, that are the bacteria. So when we are getting Roundup-loaded food, our bacteria are being killed because their shikimate pathway is being disrupted. And all of the chronic diseases, all of the new epidemics can be related to the disruption of our inner ecosystem, like there's a disruption of the outer ecosystem. So repairing the Earth's web of life is the service we have to offer today. Like I said, there's no escape from this. And there is no inevitability to extinction. And in the 30 years when I've been doing the work on seed saving, building Navdanya, doing the organic farming, the data that's coming out, we could feed 2 times the world's planet, the world's population, just by serving the soil organisms. 2 things I've learned is our food is a byproduct of our seed cycle of renewal. Seed gives rise to seed. Along the way, it also gives us food. 1 seed gives you 100 seeds, 1,000 seeds, 1,000,000 seeds. Some of that becomes our food. But our agriculture is a byproduct of our feeding the soil. The law of return. Food. We don't have to produce food. We've just got to feed the soil organisms. So many of them, so invisible, the mycorrhizae, that we don't even know how we're feeding them and how they're feeding us. The last thing I want to say, besides the caution that we should not fall in the trap of commodification of the soil's life or reductionism of the soil's life, which sadly a lot of movements, and I wouldn't call them movements, movements don't do that. But some people think that you have to create such hopelessness and create such panic and then give a miracle solution, one magic bullet. There are no miracle solutions, there's just the miracle of life. And life isn't a problem. So it's not asking for a solution, it's just asking for us to participate and respect it. Now, at the time where we are thinking about all of these interconnected issues, my favorite company, Monsanto, is also thinking. And interestingly, we all thought its headquarters are Missouri, but they're moving very fast into Silicon Valley. They just bought in 2014 the world's biggest climate data corporation. And there was a bill actually in the US Congress that wanted to privatize climate data. Not that they'd collect the data, there'd still be public systems to collect the data, but its selling would be private as a commodity. They've also, in 2014, bought the world's largest soil data corporation called Solam. Look at the language in their imagination. We talk of the life of the soil, we talk of the sacred soil. They don't. The company's proprietary climate technology platform, TM, combines hyperlocal weather monitoring, agronomic modeling, and high-resolution weather simulations to deliver a suite of tools that help farmers manage risks through precision agriculture products and services, including precision farming equipment and software. What's precision farming equipment? Deals that Monsanto has with tractor companies like John Deere to put spyware into the tractor, so as it moves over your farm, it collects data on your soil, which then goes and gets processed into big data, and that gets sold back to the farmer. What we need is the deep, loving relationship and the deep knowledge of our soil that comes from working with the soil. What we are being told is, I think all countries have had these weather prediction things for farmers. What are they called? Almanacs, yeah? But farmers have the deepest knowledge. A little field like this will have 30 kinds of soil. They'll know this corner will grow this crop, that corner has this much moisture, will grow that crop. That kind of intimate knowledge and living knowledge is real knowledge, it's real intelligence. This waiting for big data, I smiled to myself. I said, first they said chemical fertilizers will feed us, pesticides will feed us. Then they said GMOs will feed us. Now they're saying big data will feed us. Big data gave you your president. Big data. And data is not knowledge. Data is definitely not wisdom. So you have an amazing explosion of ignorance, ecological ignorance, and collecting data on ignorance of what is living soil and packaging it into a commodity can be a very good commodity, but it cannot be the basis of healing the earth. Monsanto is looking at $3 trillion from insurance of connecting the soil data, the climate data, and surveillance. And their head of acquisitions, they bought 12 companies in Silicon Valley right now. And the acquisitions head, John D. Hamer, part of what they're talking about in terms of precision agriculture and digital agriculture is not just the spyware in the tractors, but surveillance drones over the farm. And this is what John Hamer says. If you think about it, there are two people on earth that need to know a lot about remote sensing technology, surveillance technology, Monsanto and the CIA. Over these years, as I've saved seed, as we've seen our soils become 100% richer in all nutrients, where we've reduced our water use by 70% because the soil is holding the water, where we've seen our pollinators increase sixfold, growing 2,000 varieties of crops. I realize that a century does not have to be a century of panic, a century of anxiety about extinction, but a century of wake up to say not only will we not be extinct, we will not allow the sixth mass extinction to happen, which is so rooted in industrial farming, that extinction is not the future. Care for the earth, respect for all humans, living as an earth family, joining our intelligence with the intelligence of all beings, that is the future. And that is something each of us can begin to do today. Thank you. Some questions? Thank you. Oh, thank you.
Something alive.
How do you like blue? Thank you. Thank you. I'll keep it there. With them?
So there will be time for a few questions for maybe 10 minutes. If you want to come on this, if you have any question, Diego is going to move a microphone over. Diego, where is the microphone? Okay, can you move it over there, please? So if you have questions, and also there are some copies of this. Can I show this? Sure. Of this report? And maybe I'm going to give it to Ruchi, and you can come and if you want it. And after the questions, you can go online to the table from the bookstore, and they are going to have the noise over there. Right here. No, microphones are right. Yes, can you put it over there, Diego? Muévelo para allá, por favor, para que la gente se acerque. Allá a la orilla, porque aquí no van a poder pasar. So, do you want to go to Ruchi? Yeah. Okay, Camille wanna hand them to Ruchi. Okay. So, if you have questions, please, you can come to the end of the. And I want to remind you that, how many of you are coming Friday and Saturday to the conference? Well, there will be a lot more people. We have already registered over 600 people, so it's going to be very big. And so Vandana, some people is going to ask questions. Anyone has questions? I think Theo has a question. So.
Vandana, thank you so much for your gifts, your fluency, your tenacity, and your expression of love for the rhizosphere. My question is that if you were to ask each of us who are here at Soil Not Oil, and definitely know we have our work to do, if you were to tell us what would be the most specific, effective action that we could undertake until we have the honor of your visit again, possibly next year, what would that be?
You know, we are in September. 2nd October is the birth anniversary of Gandhi, who's been my inspiration for nonviolence. It's now recognized by the United Nations as the Day of Nonviolence. We've seen 200 years of the violence of fossil fuels, 100 years of those fossil fuels being turned into the chemical fertilizers, the chemical pesticides, the chemical herbicides, and it has literally been a century of ecocide and genocide. I think what we can each do is 2nd October, look out for Seed Freedom, the website on seed freedom, both for this report as well as the report we did yesterday on the toxic story of Roundup, the glyphosate issue, which has been labeled in California as a probable carcinogen. And there are many, many cases, including I think 600 people or 1,000 people who have sued Monsanto for cancer. I think we need to start preparing, not for a century of extinction and panic and escape and the $1 billion fare to Mars. I think each of us needs to start working on a poison-free farming, a fossil fuel-free economy, and freedom from the fossilized and colonized mind that is being created. And we can begin with food because it is where the worst violence of the system is taking place. This is what's creating 75% ecological destruction, 75% of the health damage to us and the planet. And give it a little more time, we'll have a dead planet and very sick people. So look out for 2nd October for the actions that are possible to create the next century, which we have to shape in true Earth democracy, a century without dependence on the poisons that come from fossil fuels, which means we have to look out for where we can grow our food. If we can't grow it, where are the farmers in our neighborhoods, in our local bioregion, who grow organic food without poisons? I think if each of us makes a commitment to grow poison-free food and eat poison-free food, we become the biggest force on this planet.
Hello, Dr. Shiva. What comments do you have, if any, on the role that the broader global economic system, fossil fuels aside, but the economic system itself, the way it's structured, the way that it operates, is threatening the biosphere and causing this extinction?
Well, you know, the larger economic system is basically a system of fraud. It's a system of fraud because it's taken all the wealth of the world, including the wealth of nature, and put it in the hands of 8 men, you know? 6 years ago, it used to be 362 men who had half the wealth of the world. Last year, it had dropped to 62. This year, it's dropped to 8. Now, every step through which they have accumulated that wealth is theft. And Gandhi had said there's 7 sins of an exploitative economy. But the one that really hits me is wealth without work. Not one of them works. Not one of them works. They gamble on the global casino. They gamble on putting people's lives at risk. This insurance of $3 trillion that Monsanto is seeking for climate risks is in addition to the $1 trillion they were looking at, which we've stopped them from collecting patent royalties from around the world. This is a rental economy. It's a rental economy by turning every aspect of the earth, which is our commons, into a propriety commodity. And therefore, preventing those who want to work honestly in service of the earth into criminals. There's attempts to make seed saving a crime, organic farming a crime, local food systems a crime, a local street food a crime. There is an amazing attempt to criminalize life while rewarding crime. And that is why we need to recognize the true economy, which is the economy of nature, the true economy, which is the economy of people's work and effort, and what it creates. And recognize that GDP was created for the war, like chemical fertilizers came out of the war. And a little country called Bhutan, with whom I work very closely on making a transition to 100% organic Bhutan, they said, we are not going to measure gross national product and gross domestic product. We're going to measure gross national happiness and well-being. And the word wealth, its original meaning is well-being. We've got to reclaim our well-being as the basis of the economy.
Hello, Vandana. My background is in biomimicry, innovation inspired by nature, and I'm wondering where the intersection of biomimicry and agriculture occurs, and where you see the future of farming as related to our connection with nature.
Yeah. I don't think we have to mimic nature. We've got to recognize her brilliance. And very often let her continue to do the work, and we do ours.
Hi, Vandana. Thank you so much for everything you're doing. You spoke a lot about the physical component, which is so important, of working together with nature, being part of nature. You also spoke of value and respect, which I consider kind of a more spiritual component, which is very important. Can you talk a little bit about the art or cultural component maybe that's important, and if it's important, and how would you describe the progression maybe in that sense of this work as a whole that we're working on?
Well, first, I think it's Aldo Leopold who talked about a healthy ecosystem is a beautiful ecosystem. That health reflects in beauty. But increasingly we are realizing in ecological science that the ultimate freedom of an organism, of a society, of a community, it's being described as autopoiesis, self-creativity. That is what is now the power that has to respond to the power of destruction, of invasion, of extraction. And I think it was our common friend, dear Doug Tompkins, who always related ecology, balance, and beauty. Now, we can think of art in terms of what humans do. But I think creating beauty and creating artistic forms is something nature also does. I think we will not be able to address the sixth mass extinction, climate havoc, or all the other, including the redundancy of 90%. You know, they're actually writing papers nowadays on how the world will be a class of useless people. And they'll be made useless because of artificial intelligence and self-driving cars. Poor Silicon Valley is desperate. Everyone's trying to make self-driving cars. But the interesting thing is, when they say, okay, we'll have 99% useless people, you cannot employ them, unemployable people, but they have to be kept busy because otherwise they'll create trouble. And what's the way to keep them busy? Give them games to play, digital games to play. Now, can you imagine a life where all you do is play digital games? Don't use your hands to build the soil, don't use your hands to cook, don't use your hands to have community? That too, for me, is beauty of relationships, beauty of peace, beauty of ordinary people with deep security of their lives. I see that disappearing. And when I talk about soil not oil, and there's a section in Soil Not Oil where I've written, the biggest thing we can do for our humanity is work with the soil. Because it helps us remember that we are part of the soil, that the word human is derived from the word humus, which is fertile soils, allows us to reclaim our creativity, because for 200 years with the fossil fuel economy, we've been told that working with our hands is primitive. And work with the hand should be made disposable. And let someone else do the work. Let the fossil fuels do the work. Let the chemical spraying do the work. And beauty is the art of creativity, not just in our isolated level, but our interconnected level.
Thank you so much. You'll have to bear with me. I lost my voice. But I appreciate the timing of your presence here, because I'm coming from an industry, the cannabis industry, where we're currently trying to understand how to protect our genetics. And so in your talk earlier, you mentioned genetic mapping. how do we discern what, like, is it better to be a part of an open source platform that does genetic mapping, or is it better to just save seed in our community? What would you suggest? How do we protect our seed in that context?
Well, the way I've done it for 30 years by creating Navdanya is to first not recognize the patents, because no one invents a plant.
Right.
The plant makes itself. It's autopoietic. Therefore, to be part of the movement, I know some of the big companies are trying to take patents on cannabis. But the second is to maintain the diversity and maintain the decentralized economies based on our plant biodiversity as a commons. We call it open source also.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you again so much. I'm a nurse, and for years I've been talking to my families about, are you consuming poisons? What puts poisons in? They look at me in a strange way. But now from your speech and talk here, I have to think about it in a bigger way. So the confusion that I come to is like, what about GMO? The confusion around, is this really GMO or local, or, you know, the choice of the foods, and how do you keep that whole big concept of poison out of your food choices?
Well, I think we have two safety systems. The first is grow food without poisons, or eat food that has not been grown by poisons, which means it's organic. Second, to know that it was without poisons, eat local too, because local creates the relationships of assurance. No level, you know, and you've seen the debates in your country on labeling. You know, the GMO labeling has been made a laughing matter out here. 62 countries have mandatory labeling. And out here all they want is those silly little, what are they called? No, they've gone beyond barcodes. QR, yeah. So, given how much our regulatory systems have been corrupted and hijacked, given how much our governments are willing to give up their duties to protect our health, I don't think we are at the moment where we can say to government, tell us what's in this food, because they're going to hide it from Monsanto. So we'd better know. And the best way to know is how it was grown locally. So local, organic.
Thank you so much for coming. It's such a treat. I had a lot of thoughts, and I just want to distill it down to, I live in Oakland, and the name comes from oak trees. Oakland, the home of oaks. And it sort of encapsulates what I've been thinking about as I've been listening to you, and over the last year, making a lot of changes in life. And for the first time, living in a place that's almost all cement all around me, growing my own food, and it's living, and using fertilizer that is not fertilizer, but it's decomposing plants in the form of compost. And it's just such a privilege to see you here in person and to hear you. I've recently watched Symphony of Soil. Yesterday, I watched the very disturbing film Food, Inc. for the second time. And I think it's important to gather together, to share our interconnectedness. And it's just been a very emotional week. I have a lot of friends in the Caribbean. And these horrible things that are happening are difficult to deal with. And I feel hope when I hear you. I feel inspired. And I'm really happy to carry on with this work, and it's so important. And I want to thank you again for being here. And one other last thought that I've been thinking about all week is I heard a quote from Hippocrates about food, and food being medicine and food being life. And it may have been from Food, Inc. or the Symphony of Soil, but recently saw it. And that's not at all what I ever thought of one of the most well-known quotes from Hippocrates. It's used so much in the medical field, the Western medical field, in such a different way. And this meaning, this quote, and what you're bringing to us today is so much more affirming and so much more life-bringing. So thank you. I just wanted to thank you.
Thank you.
Namaste. Thank you for your time. I really appreciated your comment about Elon Musk and this sort of trend towards escapism, which I don't agree with personally either, but I will say that Elon Musk has inspired me to pursue technology as a way of leaning off of these old patterns of consumption. He's also created Tesla and revolutionized the electric auto industry and made it mainstream. He's also a proponent of Solar City and the dependence that we can have on renewable energy. And I wonder, how can you see technology being a merger for us to be more efficient, be more effective in transmitting information and becoming more of a sustainable world? As technology will never go away, it'll only continue to be more influential. Thank you.
Yeah, you know, Jerry Mander is here, and he's the one who's done so much thinking on the issue of technology. But technology, all it means is tools. And they've been tools from the time people lived in the forest, and there will be tools in the future. The difference today is not in the nature of tools. The difference is we've elevated tools to be the deciders of our humanity. And there are two means that humanity has always used. One is money as a means, and the other is tools as a means. Both of these means have been elevated to be ends of the human enterprise. And as ends that are beyond evaluation, beyond assessment, beyond choice, that is what starts to both be harmful for the earth. I mean, I deal with Monsanto all the time, including in courts where they stand up and say, it's technology. I said, still a seed. Now with the Bt toxic gene in it, and you're taking royalties, and by saying technology, you don't escape from the injustice and illegality of your royalty collection. You don't escape from the fact that you put a toxic gene which has impact on the soil organisms, on the pollinators, and on our food and health. So we cannot afford the risk of thinking that technology does not need to be assessed, evaluated, and we have to have pluralism at any point. You know, I'm living in a country which had the amazing technological pluralism, and my dad always had the lanterns, you know, and he always taught us, he says, never give up a technology. Have the electricity, but electricity will fail. And in India, we repeatedly are reminded the electricity will go. So we have 5 other options. It's when one driver of one tool pushes it as the next step of human progress and takes away all our choices. That's when things go wrong.
Thank you.
Well, I want to thank Vandana. It has been amazing. Sometimes she doesn't have a lot of time, and I think she took now over an hour and a half. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And now if you want to buy a book, she's going to be signing books at the table. So if you want to go right now, because there are not a lot of soil, not oil. And also she has some copies, or Ruchi has some copies of this report. That is a new report. And also I wanna acknowledge the work of Vandana, because thanks to her, this is our 10th conference. This is our 10th annual conference, this year, the Tear Soil No Oil, and it's thanks to people like Vandana Shiva.